Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the church. Thank you so. I love to start with who's never been here before, but I know almost every single person here, so I would say everybody's been before. Welcome back. We are always so grateful to have you as our friends in our community, and you're the reason why we're here. Eric and April can attest to that. Tonight, I'm Sherry Pascarella. For those of you who we haven't met, I have the great honor of being the executive director here. There's not much to say because we have two amazing women who are about to join us in the chairs behind me, one of whom is Sag Harbor's own Andrea Harum Schiavoni. Please. Who is a force of nature, of vitality, of creative energy, of intelligence, of intellect, of knowledge. I mean, the term Knowledge Friday was invented for women like Andrea. Thank you, April. April's clapping, so I must have said something right. So without further ado.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's funny, the first thing I feel like doing is when I grab a mic and I see people in front of me is my sound check. You know, every singer has a little something that they sing just to get things going. You look to see if the tech can hear you, that sort of thing. So, shall I? Yes. Okay. So this is a song that was written and performed by 6 voices. I can do only one of them at a time anyway. And it's a group called Sweet Honey in the Rock, and I've been lobbying for Sweet Honey in the Rock to come to the church at some point for a while, so I just had to get that in there. So these are just some beautiful words. There are no mirrors in my Nana's house, no mirrors in my Nana's house. Dum, dum, dum. There are no mirrors in my Nana's house, no mirrors in my Nana's house. And the beauty that I saw in everything, the beauty in everything was in her eyes. You know the truth was in her eyes. Then you keep looping that until you see the tech guy go, yep, so are we good? So I've been singing for as long as I can remember. My first solo was Proud Mary. I was 8 years old, and I had my little 8-year-old backup singers, you know, rolling, we're all going rolling. And it was really fun. So that's when I started. It's always been a part of me. It's something that I can't imagine my life without music. It's just that much a part of me. And as I was preparing for tonight, I was thinking, interestingly enough, even before music, there was something else that was a part of me, and it's Sag Harbor. And I'm going to tell you a little story. So in 1958, my grandfather, Al Harum, who was a former editor at the Brooklyn Eagle, and my grandmother, Julia Davidson, who was a writer for the Associated Press, they hopped in their car and headed east from New York City in search of a place where they could write. And they drove, and they drove. And this was with the old highways. There was nothing super about highways then. And they drove and they landed here. They were friends with Canio. Where are my dear friends? They were friends with Canio, with Steinbeck. There was such a strong writers' community here, and they could thrive together. They could pull the best out of each other here. Oddly enough, in that same moment, a course was chartered for my life. That was 1958. That's the same year that my father, who was a professional tennis player, was at a tournament in Cleveland, Ohio, where he met my mom, a first-generation American Italian. And she was just finishing up as getting her degree in architecture. They were fixed up on a blind date. They fell in love, and that was that. 1959, they moved to Miami, where my dad was raised. At the time, my dad was living in Hawaii, but they moved to Miami. My brother was born in 1960. I have to state, my brother is one of the most amazing musicians I have ever met in my life, and I feel so blessed to have worked with him. I was thinking if he was up here, I would get a piano in here and sing together, but I have a little laryngitis, as you can probably hear. I think everyone's got that, right? It's like, doesn't leave, that little, yeah. So he was born in 1960, I was born in 1964, and I spent some or all of my summers here, either some part of it or all of it here. I've worked so many jobs in this town. Who remembers Christides? Yes, I was a checkout girl at Christides. I made the donuts at the IGA for a man who would eventually become my Uncle Joe. I helped build the tennis courts at Massachusetts Park, and I was hired as a hitter. So I would go there, and whoever didn't have someone to hit with them, I would hit with them. Did that for years, and I ended up hitting with a woman who ended up being my Aunt Catherine Anacone way back then. And you know what? While I'm here, I have to tell a funny story. So you know how there are those two courts right up front, closest to Main Street? So my dad was a professional tennis player. We played a lot. We were father-daughter champions a couple years in a row in Florida, and we played a lot. And we would come up and play on those two courts. Now, the GF Schiavoni, or as they said it, Schiavoni, business was right across the street from those tennis courts. And the trucks would go in and out and in and out all day long. And as a young girl, I knew that whenever you looked in one of those trucks, inevitably there was a good-looking guy driving the car. And so I couldn't help but look. I just couldn't help but look. So much so that when I would play with my dad up on the upper courts, and he saw a truck coming from behind me, he'd wait a little bit. And he'd serve just as the truck was going, and I'm like this, because I couldn't help it. We married, Tommy John and I married before my dad could have met Tommy John, but one of the first things I remember saying to my dad, oh my God, I'm marrying one of the guys from the GF Schiavoni trucks, which was pretty funny. Yeah, but you know what, while we're there, forget chronology. This is Tommy John. So marriage. Lifetime partnership, whatever the commitment is to you, it's a ride, and you meet the person and you fall in love and you have those feelings, and thank God those feelings are so strong, because those are the things that kind of keep you going when the feelings are not so strong, And as we get older, we're married, I know, honey, hard to believe. It's 23 years this year, and thank you, and I'm realizing what a journey it is and how blessed I am to take this life and journey with someone like Tommy John. We are opposites attracting in many, many ways, but the things that are truly most important to us, honesty, we are both fairly blunt, we are devoted. Those are the things that we do share, and and humor. We're getting better at humor. I think he was always good with humor. I'm getting better with humor, and I'm realizing how important that is to a marriage. If you can get a laugh out first, you're halfway there, When we got married, we gave index cards to all of our guests. And we said, please give us marital advice, right? We got this big stack of stuff, right? So about a year into our marriage, I'm looking through it, and I'm like, oh my God, I keep seeing, don't go to bed angry, don't go to bed angry, don't go. And I looked at Tommy John, I said, we go to bed angry. And he looks at me and he says, yeah, but you know what? We always go to bed with each other, right? And we have yet to wake up angry. So whatever our rhythm is, something happens just next to each other, not talking, that helps resolve things. And so thank you for 23 years. Very cool. So, Sag Harbor. I mean, I can't begin to go through all of the stories besides, also worked at Barron's Cove. I waited at Barron's Cove. I worked at a place called the Bay Street Cafe, which is now Dopo la Spiaggia. And after college, I was a music major and journalism major. And I came up here because I love it here, and why not? And I was singing with a group, and I was working at a radio station called WSBH. I was writing copy for them and doing voice work, and I was assistant pro at a tennis club in East Hampton called Green Hollow Tennis Club. And it was nice. Life was good, you know, going through. I had a sense that my parents were wondering when the vacation was going to end, because my dad point blank asked me, Andrea, when is the vacation going to end? And I kind of ignored it for a while. And I was walking, I picked up the mail one day. It was a beautiful, crisp fall, like we get here. Just everything is vibrant and crisp. And I picked up the mail, and I was walking in the crosswalk from the Five and Dime to Concadoro, right? And I'm reading a letter from my mother. And I'm going on, and she says, Andrea, I think you'd be a great lawyer. I laughed so hard that I tripped, and I fell in the middle of Main Street. And every time I passed that crosswalk, I look at myself there, like on the ground, laughing so hard. You know, so I picked myself up, I went in, and I got a slice, and my mom continued with her case. And she said, the best lawyers are good writers. And you're a good writer. That would be good. And she said, and if you want to be a trial attorney, your performance skills can go beyond entertainment. It can go to help people. You can use those skills to help people. And then my Italian Catholic mother, as she always did, ended the argument with, you know, Andrea, God gave you talents, and I think being a lawyer would be the highest and best use of you for others. And I listened a little bit, but then put it away, because that was not, I didn't own a suit. I did not like sticking to hours. Oh my God, like in one place for all those hours. I couldn't see it. But time went on, and it turns out Mom was right. And she was often right. So I did. I went to law school, and I was thankful to have been able to practice with my dad for a little bit of time. But he unfortunately died soon after my admission. And even in that short time, it was great. We practiced the way we played tennis. You know, we could cover the court well together. We knew how each other worked, and we were close. So does anyone remember a newscaster named Tim Russert? Right? So soon after Dad died, Tim Russert was writing a book about fathers, and my mom loved Tim Russert. And she said, why don't you submit something? And I looked into it, and the deadline had passed, and I said, you know, Mom, the deadline passed. I'm going to submit it, you know, in Dad's honor anyway. Maybe that's enough, just to kind of, lo and behold, it made it into the book. A couple years later, Tim Russert died, and I was calling his right-hand person and giving my condolences, and he said, I got to tell you something, Andrea. You know, not only had the deadline passed for the book, but it was already to press. And Tim loved your story so much that he stopped the presses to include it. So with your indulgence, I'm going to read that story. Cool? All right. And I think I'm going to sit because I won't balance this all very well. Okay. And thank you all for being here. I don't know if everybody knows everyone else in this room, but there's some amazing people here in front of me. If you don't know the person next to you, introduce yourself, because I guarantee you're going to just be so happy you met that person. Am I balanced? Am my feet? Okay. Okay, it's called The Lawyer. I can never hold my mic right-handed. I don't know why. I was raised by a wonderful, quiet, competent, and competitive man who, along with my mom, created a home of love and fun and discipline leading my brother and me to believe we could do anything. My father spent the first part of his life on the professional tennis circuit, which was not at all lucrative back then. With a wife and 2 children, he said he needed to grow up, so he gave tennis lessons at a local club in the mornings, attended law school in the afternoon, and worked the loading docks of Miami International Airport at night, and played tournaments on the weekends for the little money it provided while Mom held the home front together. After law school, he practiced law with his father and later became a judge before returning to private practice, where he earned great respect as a litigator. He and I were very close. He coached me in tennis, in basketball, in track, and in life. And he attended every meet, game, performance, and tournament I ever had. When I finally figured out what I wanted to do in life, as you all know, it was to practice law with my dad. By then, I had done every other job in the firm. I was a receptionist at 12 when the regulars were on vacation, and had worked as a janitor, filing clerk, process server, secretary, and eventually legal assistant. Before I was admitted to the bar of Florida, my dad was diagnosed with cancer, and he died 3 months after my admission. During the last 2 years of his life, I worked at his side, watching and learning all I could do, so I would be able to carry on the practice no matter what. Within a month of Dad's death, I had my first trial. I had never even taken a deposition by myself. And in the freshness of grief, I was faced with the task of proving that our client's stroke was work-related. Just as an aside, that's kind of a tough go. Most strokes are caused by pre-existing conditions and stuff like that, so. I was opposed by one of the older defense firms in Miami, but because of the man Dad was, several of his colleagues spent hours with me, strategizing, rehearsing, and teaching me tricks of the trade. When the day arrived, I sat at the claimant's table with my secretary, across from 3 men in 3-piece suits. One of them knew close to nothing about the case. He was there just to help with intimidation. The trial lasted 3 days, and I sensed I was doing well. Opposing counsel stood for his closing statement and began, "First, let me say that Al Harum's death was a huge loss for Miami's legal community." A lump jammed in the base of my throat, and it grew as he continued with expressions of how much he admired my dad. My heart began to pound, and my eyes started to singe with that first hint of tearing. He kept on like this until I was on the verge of losing it. But then, clear as a bell, I heard my father's voice say, "Don't fall for that shit, Dolly." My eyes dried instantly, and I looked around to see if anyone else had heard it. No, just me. Suddenly, I was making my closing statement, which began, "I'm glad that Mr. Herman has fond memories of my dad, but that's completely irrelevant to the case at bar." As I went on with the summation, I saw the judge nodding in agreement. We won that case, and our client's life is better because of the team of Harum and Harum. Thank you for letting me. Thanks for letting me share that. I was so blessed in the parent department, and it makes you humble as a parent to think, gee, am I anywhere near that myself? But that was great. So after Dad's death, and I had the practice going in Miami, I came up for the first Bay Haven picnic. We have a Bay Haven neighbor here. Yay. It's a great neighborhood, isn't it? It's a special place, and every year they have a picnic on the beach so everyone can see each other and see what happened during the year. And this was going to be the first time that my mom went alone. So I said, "Let me fly up. We'll go to the party together." And I was getting ready, and I thought, "Oh my God, Tommy John Schiavoni bought a house here, didn't he?" And all of a sudden, I'm putting like mascara on, like, oh my God. So we go there, and I'm sitting, in a beach chair, and my back is to the entrance, and I hear Tommy John's voice, which just, there's two things about Tommy John that floor me, just like my heart kind of drops. One is his voice. The other is to watch him ice skate. Oh my God, he's a great skater. You wouldn't know this about him. He played hockey in college. To watch him move around, especially a girl from Miami who's I think I've been on skates 3 times, but he would take the kids in his arms and go skating all around without fear, and it's a joy to behold. So anyway, I'm sitting there and I hear that voice say to my mom, "Hello, Mrs. Harum." And I look around and I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna marry Tommy John Schiavoni. I hadn't seen the guy in years, right? I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna marry Tommy John Schiavoni. And apparently he left that party, went to his best friend, Al Cornacchio, and said, "Al, I'm gonna marry Andrea Harum. What do I do with what's her name?" But that was not my problem, so whatever. So we did. We spent the first year in Miami. We realized that this was home. This is the place that had always called me back here. It is Tommy John's home. It's magical. And I have a theory about Sag Harbor. You come here, or you're born here, or whatever, and you either love it, and this is going to be a part of my life in some capacity for the rest of my life, or you're like, I don't need to come back here. And it's funny. I see that there's no in-between with Sag Harbor. So we said we want to raise our kids here, and be able to have New York City right there. And I'm so proud to say that by the time my kids were finished with high school, they knew the subway map. They knew how to get around New York City, and that was very important to us. And that was it. That's all she wrote. I mean, I ran for judgeship a couple of times. I'm now a New York State Family Court judge, an acting Supreme Court judge, and it's an honor. It's an honor to do what I do. And now you're up to date. Thank you all so much.
Hi.
Hi.
And now it's my fun to sit here and ask a few questions.
Please do.
It's very interesting that you mentioned that it made it sound as if you developed a sense of humor with Tommy John about your marriage, but clearly you're very funny.
Thank you. I think that I got less serious about the concept of marriage. I don't know if that makes sense to anyone or anyone else is that way. Marriage can be really heavy, but it doesn't need to be. And I think to have a great marriage, and maybe a great life in general, there needs to be a lot of lightness, and a lot of ability to know what's truly serious and what isn't. And I think, okay, another example. I was very, I feel bad. Tommy John's like, oh God, what's she going to say? I was very, and I don't want to say was, I consider myself a feminist from the era in which I came. And I was, I did things on my own. I lived on my own. I didn't get married till I was 36, and by that time, I was set in my ways or whatever. I was pregnant, about 8 months pregnant. And there was a chair in the attic, basically, that I wanted in the living room. So I mentioned it to Tommy John. I said, when you have a chance, can you get the chair up in the attic? And he said, oh, sure, and he went on to work. I didn't even give him the day. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, oh, I can get my own damn chair, So, and I climb up the ladder. It was a wing-back chair. I put it upside down on my head and then went back down the ladder, and I put it in the living room. And Tommy John comes home, and he walks in, and he's just staring at the chair. And I'm like, what? I can get my own chair. I can get a chair. I'm pregnant. I'm not like an invalid, right? I can do this, right? And he's just looking at the chair. And then he turns to me and he said, Andrea, how do you expect me to show how I love you if you don't give me the chance to do it? I learned a lot. And he's right. He shows love by doing, by building, by things like that. And I needed to lighten up a bit and, give them a couple days. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question.
No, but yes and no. Yes and no. It's a beautiful story, and there is this kind of magic between you two that's very evident when when we've hung out a couple of times socially. It's just, the sparkle is there. I was going to ask you, except that it seems to, I was in love with your mother.
Oh, yes.
Which I really miss her. She's someone that I would see. Because she was in Bay Haven and we're on a neighboring street, so we would just run into each other. I cannot remember how we started talking, but
I can tell you how. So you were from Cleveland.
yes.
My mom was from Cleveland.
Boom.
Growing up, you would think Cleveland was utopia. She talked about Cleveland. The symphony orchestra and the ballet, and loved Cleveland. So she had seen your work, and she had looked up your history. She's like, oh, I knew it. She was from Cleveland, so she probably accosted you if I know my mom was a wonderful human being.
If you call slowing the car and rolling down a window
all right.
and saying, excuse me, accosting.
Okay, good. All right, very good.
No, she was just absolutely adorable, but she had this extraordinary magnetism. Like when the window rolled down and I said hi, and I looked at her and I thought, I like you. Why? Would you even think that about someone? And yet there was this kind of, she had an allure.
She definitely did.
Bright. She had this like shining brightness to her. Like you felt like the next thing that she said was going to be smart, intelligent, funny, something.
Right.
Like,
And a lot of these folks know her. And she was amazing.
She was just fantastic.
I was so, and that personality, to be raised by that, and my dad was this very elegant, quiet gentleman. It was a perfect match. It was a perfect match. And to be raised by, I think, two magical people was really such good fortune for me.
Well, I bring her up partly because I was going to ask you whether, having become a lawyer, you had ever been, as a child, curious about or interested in ethics particularly, because, just the whole, when I think about, because you're a judge, it's one thing to be a lawyer, but you're a judge, and I always think that's so deeply impressive, and there's a couple of things I wanted to ask you about. One, had you been interested in ethics, and also, when you're a judge, you must have to make creative decisions about situations.
That's interesting
because
that you
they're
would,
so complicated. And of course, we roll here with creativity. And to me, the idea of being a lawyer, you could kind of follow the law, look for a loophole, figure out a way, like a chess game or something. You could figure out a way of making a move that would get you someplace.
Right.
But for judging, it just seems like a whole other thing.
I think, especially in family court, it's all about being creative, because no human is the same, let alone a family dynamic. So you really want to listen and learn how you can best serve this family, and sometimes you do get creative, and I'm very encouraging of the arts in my courtroom.
How
different
tell about that?
We've sung at different times. I had one attorney. Where is John? Pagano. Pagan, Luis Pagan. He actually serenaded me one day. It was the best thing. He goes, Judge, I know you sing. Can I sing a song for you? I said, of course. And in the open court, he sang Heard It Through the Grapevine, and he did a great job. It was the best. It was the best. But especially with kids, and they're in really tough situations. Some days I come home and I'm just trying to lose some of the images that I have in my head, because it is the worst. It's not only man's inhumanity to man, but it is the people we are supposed to trust most in this world committing crimes against you or children. And that's just a different kind of twist that is agonizing. I remember, well, no, I'm not going to share the images, but needless to say, I have those images in my head, and I think about the kids, and I always ask what they enjoy doing, whether it's sports or art or whatever. And generally, if they sing or they cook or they paint or they dance, my first question is, do you do it every day? Just some part of every day. Do you set aside for your art? And then I'll keep up with that. Like I'll make a note what their art is. Sometimes they bring stuff in that they've made. Sometimes they'll want to sing for me, or because for me, tennis and music were the only reasons I did not drop out of high school. I wasn't a good student. I didn't enjoy it at all, but in order for me to play on the team, I had to go to the school, and in order for me to sing with the groups there, I had to go to school. So if it weren't for art and tennis, I would have dropped out,
Yeah. But it almost seems like it would be fun to go to your court, but not obviously.
Well, I hope it's not scary. I hope it's not scary. I don't want it to be a scary place for kids to be,
Well, anyway, so going back for 1 second to your mom, though, there just seemed to be something so incredibly balanced about her, and she kind of exuded a certain kind of, I don't know how to say this better, but a kind of fairness, like someone who could listen and give opinions. She was like both equally a great listener and a great opinion giver, and you are very much that way, I think, if I may say so. And then I thought, well, maybe then you were raised with ethics in some fundamental way. I didn't know that your dad was a lawyer too.
And a judge. He was a judge.
Well, voila.
Yeah, but it's so funny. Like in our house, you could do anything. Mistakes were great. My parents were all for mistakes. That's how you learn. The one thing you could not do in our house was lie. You want to tick off my parents? You lie. In fact, I know the last lie I told in life. And it was Easter Sunday, 1981. I told my parents I was going to a Heart concert, the band Heart, at the University of Miami baseball stadium. University of Miami is in Coral Gables. It's not a difficult neighborhood in any way. It's safe. As it turns out, it was actually the arena downtown, and I was going with 3 friends. I got so drunk that I passed out. So we were drinking on the way there. I can't believe I'm saying this, but whatever. So we get there, and I am so drunk I pass out, right? It's the only time in my life that I've ever passed out from drinking too much. I wake up, my girlfriend had pulled my hair back, and I had thrown up around the blanket. They had taken care of me, right? And it is now 2 hours past the time that I told my parents I would be home. So mom's on the verge of calling the police. So I'm panicked and feeling, And so we get home, I walk in the door, and my mom, in all of her Italian and in English, is just having at me, like, blah, 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 blah. And my dad walks up to me once, mom leaves the area and walks up and said, "Andrea, you disappoint me," and turned around and walked away. Oh my God. So that's the last lie I ever told in my life.
But they knew you were going to the concert.
Yeah, but it was in a really bad place where they would not have let me go.
So it was the location.
It wasn't the University of Miami. It was downtown Miami, and it was with people she didn't know. But fortunately, they took good care of me. But so honesty was it. Honesty was like the thing in our household.
And was that on one of the cards that you received from your wedding guests? Don't
be
lie.
honest. We did get a card that said, "Remember, she's always right." And I tried to hold, and that was from another judge, Judge Cooker, and it's like, honey.
But so where did the acting come from? And do you do this regularly? I know that you perform and sing, but acting too is another part of your life.
So I think of all art as storytelling. Whatever it is, I think you're telling a story. And songs are great. You get, 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 3:05 as it used to be, to tell a story. And I kept having this urge to tell longer stories, and urge. So several years ago, I started training as an actor. I started taking acting lessons, and I also like to collaborate. There's something about it. Janine is here. Her husband, Michael Garabedian, we've been in the same band together for about 16 years now. I love collaborating in an artistic fashion. And once I made the transition to acting, I loved it there too. Here's this nice long story, and I want to introduce John Leonard, with whom I am acting. He's in the back there. We actually have a show coming up. It's being produced by Robin Aaron's production. There's Robin Aaron's.
Yay.
It's called Vanya and Sonia and Masha and Spike.
Oh,
and it's
a little Chekhov.
Yeah, exactly, and it's a great story about siblings, but it's great to work on stage and act. Another one of my acting buddies. I am Masha. Yeah, Masha.
And so
a little self-absorbed.
How do you fit this into you're doing so many things at once. It's really, when we described you as a Renaissance woman, that was no kidding.
You're very sweet. I think it's more, it's a must. If I look back over my life, the most depressing times where you're really hurting were times I was not singing. Back then it was singing. I hadn't discovered acting yet. And it taught me something like, okay, right? You need to make sure that you're making music with others all the time, or I'm not going to be balanced. So it's more of I could drink more, but like Tommy John used to say, he could tell, I was getting uptight about something. He's like, hey, when's the band rehearsing? Call Michael. You need to rehearse. You got to go. And yeah, so it's kind of a must.
And have you ever had stage fright? Because you seem like the opposite of that.
Never.
Amazing.
I don't know if that's a bad thing. And my kids are both the same way. My daughter was painfully shy. And a lot of you know Anna. And even socially, she's reserved. But you get her on a stage, and it's like a different person. Yeah.
And are either of your kids taking after you in any of your various creative pursuits?
Well, Anna is finishing up at GW as a theater major, and she's giving it a go next year. She's just going to go and audition and hope she gets one gig for every 100 auditions that she does. So that's it. That's the hope, right? And Thomas is an artist, and he's wanting to pursue that. He's got his application into FIT, so fingers crossed.
Yeah, I knew about that.
Yeah.
He was at one of our workshops here, at least.
And they both sing. They both have great pitch. They both have great rhythm. They're both really good singers.
Yeah. And do you perform more during the summer than the winter? Do you have like a kind of
I don't think so. I also want to introduce, everybody knows Ruby. We do improv. I've taken to calling this group of 13 of us Baker's Dozen because our instructor was comedian Scott Baker. And that happens a lot more in the wintertime, right? We do a lot more work, which is great.
So many of the things that you're talking about and that you do are things that absolutely terrify me. So
but you don't want to see what I paint. So
well.
we're in.
Would anyone like to ask a question about something that will cause an embarrassing reveal? Because I know she can handle it.
Yes, Michelle. Over there. There's my dear friend, Michelle.
Oh, hi, everyone. I'm sorry I'm not sitting with you, but I'm immunosuppressed, so I'm taking care of myself over here.
Well, thank you for coming.
Oh,
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
My pleasure. I thought that April's question about ethics was super interesting and important, and you did sort of address it.
But not complete,
I don't think so. I think that as I know Andrea pretty well, and I think that it's such an important part of like all aspects of your life. Integrity might be a more holistic word because ethics does apply to the law more than most. But I thought maybe you'd just address that a little bit more.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing that back. Ethics is extremely important to me. I cannot tell you. And it's something that I think about throughout every day in my own actions. Fairness, it's a balance, and it requires us, if we are to be ethical, we need to open all of our pores, our ears, our eyes, our everything to a situation in order to figure out what is the most ethical thing to do. And if we behave ethically, then no harm will be done. My dad had a couple of phrases, of course, first do no harm. You know, when you enter a situation, if you're not going to make it better, then don't get involved, right, whatever it is. And that is the flip side of the thing he would always say is, leave every room better because you were there. Sometimes it can be a smile or a joke. Sometimes it can be CPR. You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't really know what it is, but you want to leave every space better because you were there. And that is ethical to me, right? Those are the words that he would say often on a regular basis. And I believe that's a matter of ethics.
Well, when you think about...
Thank you, Michelle.
When I was in high school, I had a couple of interesting friends, and we decided to audit an ethics class in Cleveland at Case Western Reserve
Where my mom went,
University.
by the way. Which is, yeah.
So, and I can't even remember why, but we were all interested in, we all argued about moral dilemma all the time, and we thought it would be fascinating to take this course. So we went, and the instructor took a special interest in us, because what were we high school kids doing at in his classroom? But he was very nice about it. And it was so fascinating to me, because a good moral dilemma, a good ethics question, does involve a certain kind of creativity, I'm going to say, because it's so hard to get around every single angle of a problem. I mean, it just seems like one of the most fundamental things about being human that we cope with in a civilized context anyway, for what that's worth at this point, now that we're all, wisely regarding our shared imagined history. Right. But anyway, but the whole, it's not something that you hear people talk about. People don't talk about ethics anymore. People don't talk about such fundamental things that really are not only the things that glue people together morally, but they're also fascinating. They're fun to think about. They're not
And I think
spurious.
The reluctance is that it's not always easy. There's a certain vulnerability if you're going to allow yourself to see the other person's side of something, or many people's side of something. You're going to be a little exposed, and you might have your mind changed, so there's a vulnerability there, and for some reason that vulnerability has gotten such a bad rap. It's not revered in the same way. Honesty isn't revered the same way. It's more like, oh, if you get away with it, you're revered because you got away with something, as opposed to that really difficult situation when you've got something true to say, and it might hurt, it might be self-destructive, but you know it needs to be said, so you muster the courage and you say it. And that kind of thing it's not where we are.
Yeah.
All the time. And I think everybody here is there. But I long for the time when civility and ethics and that strength of character is what we all strive to have, because that's when we move forward. That's when we all move forward. And it's not a zero-sum game. It's not like, if you're doing well, I'm doing badly. In ethics, we all rise together, and we all move forward and make this world better together. So I'm hoping for the day.
Yeah, it almost seems like there's too much of a desire to win or lose, to somehow make a situation balanced, rather than allow for complexity that becomes interesting and fascinating and that you can grow with.
Right.
It's like decide, and then one person wins and one person loses, and that's what I would imagine if I were in a court or something. I would be
nobody
subtexting with.
Someone's always ticked off at you. You know what I'm saying? There's a side to everything. So someone's, but you'd like to think that at least you'd make them think. Like if I dispense justice in a way where I appear to be fair, it has the greatest likelihood of encouraging a person to do better, whatever that is. I have kind of a funny ethics story, if I can. Please. Going back to high school, you brought up high school. I was actually in elementary school, and there was a boy, Troy Waller, who was about my height,
Wait, Troy?
Troy Waller,
Yes, Troy.
and he was trying to kiss me, and I didn't want to be kissed. So I punched him. My dad also taught me how to box. He's like, you know what, you need to know how to defend yourself, whatever. So he and I would box in the backyard. So Troy Waller, I said no, he didn't listen. I gave him a black eye. I got sent home from school. I got suspended, right? And I'm sitting in the living room with my mom and dad, and my mom's like, Andrea, why didn't you use your words? Why didn't you use your words? And I said, Mom, I was speaking the language he understood.
Oh my God.
Right?
That's
So,
so
and we're
precious.
sitting there, my dad's just kind of looking at me, and he's like, okay, Andrea, given the fact that you were sent home, you've been suspended for a week, you've got extra homework to do, if you were in that same situation, would you do it again? And I said, yes. And he said, okay then. Know that that's going to be the course, but okay then. To me, it was unfair that someone was trying to kiss me, or I threw a couple other punches on behalf of others who didn't. And it didn't seem fair. It was this sense of injustice within me, and it was usually with bullies who were bigger, and I've been this height since 4th grade. You know what I'm saying? So like it was an advantage that a lot of other girls and smaller kids didn't have.
Yeah.
So I figured it was my duty.
Do you think of...
You guys are going to just think the worst of me after you hear.
No, I think it's fascinating. So do you think that your practice as a justice is, I don't know how better to ask this, but your true self? Like, do you think that you have a true self, that like one aspect of all these things that you do is more the real you, as people would say?
I don't know if any of us have one true self. You know, we have a lot of my Democratic friends here who have worked hard on my campaigns and have kept me on the bench, and I'm so thankful. Thank you very much. When you're a judge, you cannot speak publicly about politics, right? I can't say anything because I don't want to give anyone the impression that someone has an advantage in my court, and there are canons of ethics, and I cannot speak publicly about any, you name the issue. It's not that I don't have an opinion on it, but I can't publicly talk about it. And I felt I remember talking about this with Lucius Ware right before I took my oath. It's like, Lucius, it just dawned on me. And he's like, what? I said, I've got a mouth. You know what I'm saying? Like, I've never been one to be quiet if I felt something needed to be said. And now, in order for me to do greater good, I need to curb another aspect of myself. And I have, and I've been very true to that code. But when you say your true self, part of my true self is that person, you know. And one day, when I leave the bench, you won't be able to shut me up. So
Well,
I don't know.
And then you're going to be running for office.
I don't know.
If we're really lucky.
We've got just one of us. That will be great.
Yeah. Well, it could be a twofer. Would anybody
We can
else?
survive that. Grania, how are you?
Fine, thank you. Enjoying the evening.
Thank you so much.
Enjoying both of you. I just wanted to add something that hasn't been said, though it's pretty obvious. I first met you as a candidate for whatever party. You probably were on various parties' lines. And you were very rare in that it's hard to be a candidate, hard to take a human being and have them coat themselves in a wax coating of something and to say certain things over and over and over in different venues, little small places to raise money, to pay for the campaign, bigger
And God
places.
bless you, you were at every one of them.
Well, I don't know about that. But it's very hard to stay authentic and and have to not necessarily lower oneself, but go through these paces. And you're almost the only person I've seen in the last 25 years that I've been involved who was able to do it. What you saw was what you get, or however you say it. That's very rare. That's very precious. It's precious in people in general, but it was certainly precious in a candidate.
That's nice of you to say. It makes me think of one of our first dates. We're there, and we're talking about I learned more about Hamilton, Alexander Hamilton, that night than I ever had, and it was long before the musical, because Tommy John's a big Alexander Hamilton fan. But I remember telling Tommy John, if you're looking for mystery, I'm not your girl. Like, this is it. This is who I am. This is how I am. So if it's just not going to happen. And I think I just don't know any other way. I don't think that I have any greater strength than anyone else. I just don't. I don't think we need to. If we act right and we make good choices, and when we make mistakes, we own up to them. It should be okay for all of us. So we should all just kind of feel like being our authentic selves. But thank you. That's very sweet of you to say, Grania. Thank you. Yeah, I think so. I think you are right. Right.
Well, and maybe, since you are an actor too, and I don't mean this in like that you'd be pretending to have the feelings that you have, but when you need to convey something, you could pull something up maybe out of yourself at a needed moment, even if you're tired and you knew you said it before and you hear yourself saying the same thing. If you really believe it, then
that's a good point.
Then your acting could have helped, perhaps, or maybe that too. All right. Now
I have
words.
the mic. Andrea, we're in such an interesting moment right now, and the culture wars seem to be touching children, identity, families. I wondered if perhaps you could talk to if this has affected how you do your work within the courts and what that sort of looks like over the last couple of years.
I'm going to ask you to clarify the question a little bit more.
So I'm just interested, there's been a lot of questions about identity, about children's relationship to parents, fundamentally, what it is to be a parent, what it is to be families. There's this moment, it seems, where there is a sort of back and forth about where the sort of power relations within families resides versus state versus family. So I'm just interested if that has affected your work over the last couple of years. Is that clear?
It is a part of my work. It's a part of my work. Especially in family court, we get a true cross section of our community. And if I'm understanding your question correctly, and this sounds so simple, but it's love and honesty. That's what it is. I don't care if you have parents, who your parents are, who your spouse is. Everybody needs love from someone. If we're lucky enough to get it from our parents, God, we're lucky. But a lot of kids have no one, and then they find that someone, and they learn what love is. And once you know how to be loved, then you can love. And with that, we must understand that honesty is a choice. It's what you choose to do, to tell the truth or not. And with those two things, that crosses everything. That crosses gender. It crosses everything. And if that's there, then that's the unifying part of family. That's what family is, I don't know if that answered your question. Okay, good. All right. Nada.
I'm just curious, do you get Hispanic families and do you have an interpreter there in the court?
We do have an interpreter for all languages. We can do all languages. I was fluent in Spanish before I learned Italian, and now the Italian comes in first when I go to speak. But yes, and we have interpreters for every language you can imagine. Yeah.
I've been following this conversation all along, but I'm...
Oh, good, thank you.
Yeah, but I'm stuck back on an earlier thing that you said, which is that you figured out some way in your first case to win a thing that seems, counterintuitive, which is somebody having a heart attack at work.
Right.
And blaming it on the work, right?
Right.
So could you kind of go back through how you managed to do that?
So I just did a lot of research about strokes. I needed to learn everything I could about strokes in order to find out, okay, what am I going to do? And I learned through and the guy had hypertension and he was a smoker. I'm like, oh my God, how is this not a pre-existing, how is this not? So I started doing more and more research. He was a welder. He wore a complete welder's outfit. It was in Miami, in a garage that had one garage door open, but no other ventilation, in 90+ degree heat, right? So I started, investigating that and research. And through the help of an expert witness, a doctor, I learned that when you have a stroke resulting from hypertension or smoking, it occurs in one part of the brain. And when you have a stroke, the result of temperature and external things, it happens in a different part of the brain. So it ended up that this particular part of the brain was that. He might have had eventually the other kind of stroke, but that's what we did. And it was an incredible experience, to do, I really had no business being there. Eric, I got to tell you, I had no business being in that court. I hadn't taken a depo yet, and it worked. And my dad was there, all along. I would sleep in the office and be researching something, and I'd wake up, and the page would be open to the thing that I needed, stuff like that. I'd get all these this help from Dad, all the time.
Sounds like you had every reason to have been
oh my
there.
God. I was oh my God. But it worked.
Yeah.
So good.
Ruby?
Thank you. So in that trial,
Yep.
the other lawyer tried to upset you.
Oh, completely.
And break your heart and throw you off your game entirely. And it was your father's voice.
Loud, too. I don't know why no one else heard it. It was loud.
And does this happen to you often? But
Yes.
seriously, when you are mulling over the options of a difficult case, do you call on your father?
I and Mom.
And your mother, yeah.
And in my growing up, I had this crowd of women in my head called the Centuries of Women. And they were all these amazing women. I mean, Ella Fitzgerald and my grandma and, Eleanor Roosevelt, and they're all in my head. And I used to call them the Centuries of Women. And every once in a while I'd say, well, let me see what the Centuries of Women think about this. And I would just kind of listen, and see if things would come to me. So I would chat with the Centuries of Women until, then now I've, Mom and Dad are front and center, so they get the first call. Yeah.
That is so cool. Well,
Thank you.
I think the Centuries of Women would be very happy.
Are they applauding? That's
You're
what they
here
used to do
now.
in my head. And the
Yes.
Centuries of Women applaud. And they would go like this,
Any other questions? I just want to say, really, we're so honored to have you speaking, and I just think you're a magical person, and
The honor is mine, and I wasn't kidding. I'm looking around here, I'm seeing people that I just love. I love. And thank you all for being here. And thank you for sharing life with me. I greatly, greatly appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.